And welcome back. As we go ahead and look at variables and methods, let's do this with some examples now with this person class that we previously had created to kind of walk ourselves through some of the things we're going to need to create. And it's going to help us as we start looking at these methods in more detail. So previously, if you recall, we had created a string name and an int age. These, of course, are public variables that exist here. These are instance variables of this person class, and we have a write output method. Well, let's go ahead and expand this by adding another void type method, and let's just simply create one that's going to read input in. So let's read input, and this will allow us to set those parameters. So in here, we are going to need to use the scanner class, and that means I will need to import the scanner, of course. So let's go ahead and make sure we import that class right in here. So import the scanner. And then what we're going to do is we'll say a prompt here. So system out.println. Please enter your name and age. Then we can set up a string to go ahead and take in that name. So string, let's say person name is equal to kb.next. And we can do .next or we can do next line, depending on how we want to read this in. If you remember from our previous example, so we were only using a single name here, so we're just going to use keyboard next. And so now let's, of course, get an integer and get their name. So person age is kb.next int. And then once we've done that, we can then use it to update these. Now, I could, of course, make this really simple. I could just say name equals this, and age equals this, and that's going to actually save me a step here because I can reference these variables directly. I don't have to then say person name equals name or person age equals age, because again we don't need to point those because we can access these directly. Now later on when we start talking about the next modifier, which is private, there will be a couple more steps we have to do to kind of change this, but for now this is going to be a perfectly valid approach. Now there's nothing, of course, more I need to do with this read input method here. I'm just going to clean it up a little bit there. And let's go ahead and create a couple methods that are going to allow us to have a return type. So we, of course, have seen a couple of these. So I'm going to make a string one, and that is the return type here. So we're going to return a string. What do we want to return a string for? Well, what's if I want to get somebody's name? Well, I can create a method called getName. And all I'm going to do is return name. And that's all that method needs to do. Now, what about if I wanted to get the age? Well, we can do the same thing. We can say public int, because again, we're matching the type of whatever variable is up here. And we're going to say get age, open close parentheses, curly brackets, return age. And that's all we need to do to go ahead and add these pieces in here. So let's go ahead and use these methods that we just created, though, in our main. So I left in our person code that we previously created. So let's create a new person here. So we got Joe, we got Sally. Let's create a new one. Let's call this one Billy. And so Billy is, of course, going to be a new person. We don't want them to be the same as the other entities. But instead of using the .name.age that we previously had, we can say Billy.readInput, and we can set those parameters from the user. And then, of course, if we want to spit those back out, we can use the write output method, which would allow us to do that. Or if we wanted to, use this with a print line statements with those get calls like we saw before, we can do that. But for now, this is going to be enough just for us to kind of show this. Let's go ahead and run our code. And you can see it says, please enter your name and age. So we're going to say he's Billy. And let's say he is 22. All right, hit enter. And we get the person's name is Billy, the person's age is 22. And just like that, we've gone ahead and started to incorporate some new methods in here. Now, what if I wanted to use these get methods here? Let's go ahead and just use an example of this. So I'm going to, this time, do a system.out.println. And I'm going to do, how about Joe? Because notice I don't have a get method in here, but I have defined this previously. So I'm going to use Joe's age here. And if I just say Joe.getAge, it would just print out the number. So let's just put Billy in here again, 22, and we just see 21. Because if you remember, that should be whatever we set Joe's age to. Now remember, the reason why it says 21 is because we changed it here. So I'm actually going to move this up here. Actually, let's put this after we do the change. And what we're going to do is we'll put a explanation in here. So the person's age was incorrect and should be plus. There we go. And that will just give us a quick dialogue to help explain this change. So now if we rerun it, we can see now it's the person's age is correct and should be 21. And that's a quick way for us to go ahead and put that in there and start putting some context to why we might need these methods. Because of course we wanted to get his age. Now of course here we're able to use name and age, and we could just spit those out directly with our right output, which of course works. Now later on there are going to be times when maybe we need to use these get methods because we're not necessarily using them in a right output method. There might be times when we need to use them in other things. And so we're actually going to start getting used to seeing these get names, get ages, these type of methods that have a return type, because these are going to actually be used quite often when we need to use a value. And sometimes these values that we return, we're actually going to use them in other methods. So it is something for us to start getting used to seeing, because not everything's going to be a void. We're just performing an action, right? Whereas some things are needing to return things. And sometimes those values that returned, again, are going to be plugged into a void method that might do a calculation. For example, maybe I want to find the average age of these employees. Well, obviously that could be a method. I may want to run it over here, for example, in my main or something like that. There'll be some way that we can plug this in, but that's just an example off the top of my head where we can say, hey, we want to have all these ages and we're going to need to get them. And again, like I mentioned, there's going to come a time when we start changing these modifiers where they're not going to be public anymore. And that's going to change how we approach some of this programming. But for now, what we're doing with everything being public is perfectly fine and is a good example here. And let me just finish closing out this code here. I did realize I still got Billy waiting here. And again, this is going to be a great example for us to start looking at different things as we start picking apart how to construct our own methods and our own techniques to make better and better programs.